You send a broken soldier with a broken rifle into my war. Get her off my ridge before she gets my men killed." Corporal Jake Miller slammed his fist against the ammunition crate, and every Marine at Fort Raven Ridge turned to watch the woman he was screaming about, the quiet transfer standing there with a scratched old rifle slung across her back, saying nothing, absorbing every insult like it couldn't touch her. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew what she'd survived. And nobody knew that within 24 hours, that junk rifle would fire a single shot that turned Jake Miller's blood to ice. If you are watching, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The convoy came in just before noon, and Jake Miller was already in a bad mood. He'd been up since before dawn running perimeter checks, and the last thing he wanted was to babysit a new transfer that command had dropped on them without warning. When the truck rolled through the gate and stopped, he stood there with his arms crossed, waiting to see what kind of replacement they'd been sent this time. The tailgate dropped, boots hit the dirt, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd walked out of the wrong decade entirely. She was smaller than he expected. Not weak-looking exactly, but quiet in a way that made her seem younger than she probably was. She wore a worn hood pulled low, and when she reached back into the truck, she didn't pull out a modern combat kit or a hard case full of gear. She pulled out a rifle, an old one. Jake actually laughed out loud. "You've got to be kidding me," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Somebody tell me that's not her weapon." The woman didn't react. She slung the rifle across her back like it weighed nothing and started walking toward the command tent. Jake fell in beside her, grinning at the two Marines nearby who were trying not to smile. Hey, I'm talking to you." He gestured at the rifle. "That thing, what is that, a family heirloom? Did your grandpa carry that in a museum somewhere?" She kept walking. "No, seriously," Jake said, "because I've got a nephew who plays with plastic ones that look newer than that. You know we've got actual equipment in here, right? Optics that cost more than your truck. You bring that to a firefight, you're going to get somebody killed." That got a reaction, but not from her. From Private First Class Danny Ruiz, who trailed behind them and muttered, "Maybe she's just carrying it for luck." "Luck," Jake repeated. "Yeah, that's what we need out here, luck and a rusty rifle." The woman finally stopped walking. She turned her head just slightly, and for the first time, Jake saw her eyes under the hood. They weren't nervous. They weren't offended. They were calm in a way that made him uncomfortable, because it was the calm of somebody who had seen far worse than a loudmouth corporal running his mouth. "Are you finished?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, even. It wasn't a challenge. It was almost gentle, and somehow that was worse. Jake blinked. "Excuse me. You've been talking for 2 minutes," she said. "I'm asking if you're finished, because I'd like to report in, and I don't think Commander Cole wants to be kept waiting." Danny Ruiz let out a low whistle. A couple of the other Marines chuckled. Jake's face went tight. "You don't know anything about this base," he said. "You don't know these men. You don't know this valley. You show up with an antique and a smart mouth, and you think—" "I think," she interrupted, still calm, "that you judge weapons by how they look, which tells me everything I need to know about how you judge a person." She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "Where's the command tent?" For a second, nobody said anything. Then a voice cut through from across the yard. "She reports to me." Commander Nathan Cole was walking toward them, and the easy grins on the Marines' faces disappeared. Cole was a big man, weathered with the kind of steadiness that came from too many deployments. He'd earned every gray hair in his beard, and when he looked at you, you had the feeling he was already 3 moves ahead. He stopped in front of the new arrival and looked her over. Not the way Jake had sizing up the rifle, but slower. He looked at her boots, at the way she was standing, at her hands. "You're the transfer," he said. "Yes, sir." "Name?" There was a pause, just a beat too long. "Donovan," she said. "Claire Donovan." Cole nodded slowly. If the name meant anything to him, he didn't show it. Not yet. "Corporal Miller," he said without looking at Jake. "Don't you have a perimeter to run?" Jake straightened. "Yes, sir. I know what you were just doing. Go." Cole turned back to Claire. "Walk with me." Jake stood there for a second, jaw working, then jerked his head at Danny and stalked off. But he glanced back over his shoulder once, and what he saw stayed with him for the rest of the day. Claire Donovan wasn't watching Cole. She was watching the base, the gate, the high ground on the eastern ridge. the gap in the wire on the north side. Her eyes moved across all of it in the time it took to walk 20 feet, and Jake had the strange, cold feeling that she'd already memorized the whole layout and found every way it could be attacked. He shook it off. She was a joke. A broken transfer with a broken rifle, that's all. He kept telling himself that. Inside the command tent, Cole poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across to Claire. She didn't touch it. "You'll have to forgive Miller," Cole said, settling into his chair. "He's a good sniper, one of the best I've got. But he's young, and young men confuse confidence with skill." "He's not wrong to be careful," Claire said. "New people get men killed. He's just wrong about which new people." Cole studied her. "You've done this before." "I've done a lot of things before." "Your file's thin," he said. "Real thin, thinner than anybody's file has a right to be." He tapped a folder on his desk that he hadn't opened. "Support specialist. Recommended for immediate deployment. Signed off by somebody with a clearance level I've only seen twice in my career." He leaned back. "You want to tell me what that's about?" "No, sir." He almost smiled. "Direct." "I appreciate that." He turned his cup slowly in his hands. "Here's my problem, Donovan. I've got an outpost full of Marines who are exhausted, who are outnumbered, and who are sitting in the worst piece of ground in this whole province. Command keeps promising reinforcements that never come. And now they send me one soldier. Just one, with a rifle that looks like it survived 2 wars. He met her eyes. "So either somebody upstairs thinks this base doesn't matter, or they think you're worth more than a whole company. Which is it?" Claire was quiet for a long moment. "You're in a bad spot," she finally said. "You know it. That's why you're asking. You want to know if I'm going to be one more thing you have to protect, or if I'm going to help you protect these men." She leaned forward. "I can't tell you who I am. I'm not allowed to, and even if I were, it wouldn't help you. But I can tell you what I see." "Then tell me." "Your eastern ridge is a killing position, and you've got 2 men on it. Your north wire has a gap that opens up every night when the light dies right there where the rock throws a shadow. Your patrols leave on a schedule anyone could set a watch by." She said it all flatly without drama. "You've been lucky. Whoever's out there hasn't hit you yet because they haven't decided to. When they decide, that luck runs out in about 11 minutes. Cole was silent. "How long have you been on my base?" he asked quietly. 40 minutes. He set his coffee down. And for the first time, the tired steadiness in his face cracked just a little into something like fear, because everything she just said was true, and he'd been trying to get command to fix those exact problems for 3 months. "Who are you?" he said almost to himself. Claire stood, sliding the rifle back onto her shoulder. "Someone who'd like to make sure your 11 minutes never come," she said. "Where do you want me?" Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he pointed east. "The ridge," he said, "the one you already picked out." She nodded once and walked out. Cole sat alone for a while after she left. Then he picked up the folder on his desk, opened it, and read the 2 thin pages inside for the 3rd time that day. There was almost nothing there. A name, a deployment order, and one line near the bottom that had been redacted so heavily it was just a black bar with 3 visible words at the end. The 3 words were "presumed killed in action." He closed the folder slowly. "Presumed," he said to the empty tent, "not confirmed." And he had the sudden, deeply unsettling feeling that the woman he'd just sent to his eastern ridge was someone the United States military had at some point decided to bury. Word spread fast the way it always did on a small base. By the time the sun started dropping, everybody knew about the new transfer with the old rifle, and everybody had an opinion. "I heard she didn't even go through the standard workup," Danny Ruiz was saying in the mess line. "Just showed up, no paperwork." Cole didn't even question it. "Cole questions everything," said Sergeant Marcus Bell, an older Marine with a slow way of talking. "If he didn't question her, that means somebody told him not to." Jake dropped his tray down hard. "It means command stop caring about us, that's what it means. They send one soldier, one, and she's carrying a rifle that belongs on a wall." "You keep saying that about the rifle," Marcus said mildly, "because it's a joke." "Maybe." Marcus took a slow bite of his food. "But I did 2 tours with a fellow who carried an old bolt action just like that. Turned down every new optic they offered him. And you know why?" Jake rolled his eyes. "Enlighten me." because he'd put more rounds through that rifle than most men put through their whole career. He knew exactly where it hit, at every distance, in every wind in the cold and in the heat. He didn't need a computer to tell him what his own hands already knew. Marcus set down his fork. A new rifle, you gotta learn it. An old one you've carried long enough, it's part of you. Man like that doesn't miss Jake, not because of the rifle, because of what the rifle means about how long he's been doing it. Jake didn't have an answer for that. He didn't want one. She's a support specialist, he said finally. That's what the order says. Support. She's here to hand out ammo and stay out of the way. That's it. Sure, Marcus said. Whatever you say. But across the mess tent, Jake could see Claire Donovan sitting alone in the corner. She wasn't eating. She was field stripping the old rifle, her hands moving over it in the dim light, without her even needing to look down, pulling it apart, wiping it, checking it, putting it back together in a smooth, unhurried rhythm that she'd clearly done 10,000 times. And Jake noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Every few seconds without stopping, her hands, she glanced up at the tent flap, at the exit, at the men around her, cataloging, tracking. She was cleaning a rifle in a safe mess tent, and she was still watching every door like she expected the war to come through it. Nobody cleaned a weapon like that unless they'd learned the hard way what happened to people who stopped paying attention. Jake looked away. He didn't like the feeling crawling up the back of his neck. It felt too much like being wrong. Night came, and with it the cold, and Fort Raven Ridge settled into the tense quiet that every man there had learned to hate. The quiet was never really quiet. It was the sound of waiting. Cole made his rounds. He found Claire on the eastern ridge, exactly where he'd sent her, lying flat behind a low fold of ground, the old rifle stretched out in front of her. Anything, he asked, crouching beside her. Not yet. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But they're coming. Cole went still. How do you know? The dogs in the village stopped barking about 40 minutes ago. She didn't take her eye from the scope. Birds went quiet on the north slope right after. Something's moving out there, and it's moving careful. Careful means it's not a farmer. Cole keyed his radio low. All positions, weapons hot. Eyes open. He looked at her. How many? Scouts first. 3, maybe 4. They'll come to look, not to fight. They want to see how you react, what lights up, where your men move. She adjusted her grip, slow and patient. That's the part that matters, Commander. They're not here to kill you tonight. They're here to learn you. And what do you want to do about it? Claire was quiet for a moment. I want to teach them the wrong lesson, she said. Down the ridge, Jake was at his own position, and he'd heard the weapons hot call. His pulse picked up. This was where he was good. This was where all his training, all his equipment, all his confidence actually meant something. He settled behind his rifle, a top-of-the-line system, everything the military could give him, and scanned the darkness through his advanced optic. Miller report, Cole said in his ear. Nothing yet, sir. Optics are clean. If something's out there, I'll see it before. He didn't get to finish, because that's when the first shot cracked across the valley. It didn't come from Jake's position. It didn't come from any of the fire teams. It came from the eastern ridge, a single flat, sharp report that rolled out across the dark and then vanished into silence. Jake's head snapped up. What was that? Who fired? Nobody called a target. Hold, Cole said. Hold your fire. Sir, somebody just... I said hold. And through his optic, Jake saw it. Out in the black at a distance, he could barely make out, even with all his technology, something had dropped. A shape that had been low and moving was now just a still lump on the ground. He hadn't even seen it. He'd been staring right at that stretch of ground, and he hadn't seen a thing, but she had. Before he could process it, a second shot cracked out. Same ridge. Same flat, unhurried sound. Like a period at the end of a sentence. 50 feet from the first shape, a second one dropped. And then the whole valley went silent. No return fire. No shouting. No third target to shoot. Whatever else had been out there in the dark had frozen or fled. The scouts who'd come to learn the Marines' habits had learned exactly one thing. Something on that ridge could see them when they couldn't see it and could kill them before they even knew they'd been found. On the radio, nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Then Danny Ruiz's voice came through, hushed and shaking. Did anybody see who fired that? Where'd that come from? Eastern Ridge, Cole said quietly. Sir, that's got to be 400 meters plus in the dark. No illumination, a moving target. Danny's voice cracked. Who the hell is up there? Cole didn't answer. He was looking through his binoculars at the eastern ridge at the low fold of ground where a small woman lay behind an old scratched rifle that his best sniper had called junk 12 hours ago. She hadn't moved. She hadn't celebrated. She'd taken 2 impossible shots in the dark and then gone right back to watching calm as still water, like it was nothing at all. And Nathan Cole, a man who had seen a great deal of war, felt something cold settle into his chest. Donovan, he said into the radio, report. Her voice came back low and even. 2 down, scouts. The rest broke and ran east. A pause. They'll be back, Commander. But not tonight. Tonight they're going home to tell somebody that this base bites. Cole lowered the binoculars slowly. Somewhere behind him, he heard footsteps crunching up the path fast and urgent. He turned to find Jake Miller climbing toward the ridge, his face pale in the dark, all the swagger gone out of him. Sir, Jake said, breathing hard, that shot, both those shots, I was watching that exact ground with the best optic we've got, and I didn't see anything. Not a thing. And he stopped staring up toward Claire's position. How did she even see them? Cole looked at the young corporal for a long moment. She didn't see them, Jake, he said quietly. She expected them. There's a difference. And it's the difference between a man who knows how to shoot and someone who's been hunted so long she's learned to think like the thing hunting her. Jake swallowed. Who is she? Cole handed him the binoculars. Take a look, he said. Tell me what you see. Jake raised them and found Claire on the ridge. She was already breaking down her position, moving to relocate the way real snipers did, never firing twice from the same spot. Every motion was economical, practiced, old. I see. Jake started and then he stopped because the word that came to him didn't make sense for a support specialist with a museum rifle. But it was the only word that fit. I see a professional, he said quietly. Yeah, Cole said, so do I. He took the binoculars back. And professionals like that don't just show up at outposts. Nobody's heard of carrying a rifle. They refuse to give up with a file that's been blacked out down to 2 pages. He looked out at the dark valley where 2 enemy scouts lay dead in ground his men couldn't even see. Somebody hit her, Jake, somebody powerful. And now somebody just as powerful dug her back up and dropped her on my ridge, and I want to know why. Jake didn't say anything for a while. The wind moved through the dark. And then quietly in a voice that carried none of his earlier mockery, he asked the question that would haunt him for the rest of the deployment. Sir, what if she's not supposed to still be alive? Cole didn't answer him, but the fact that he didn't answer told Jake everything. The rest of the night passed without another shot, but no one slept. Claire relocated twice more, then finally came down off the ridge as the first gray light started bleeding into the sky. She walked into the base with the old rifle across her back, and this time when she passed the Marines, nobody laughed. They watched her. All of them. In the way men watch something they don't understand and aren't sure they should trust. Danny Ruiz was the first one brave enough to speak to her. Ma'am, he said, falling into step beside her. I've never seen shooting like that. Not in real life, not ever. Claire kept walking. You've seen good shooting. You just haven't seen a lot of it. Where'd you learn to around? Danny hesitated. He was younger than Jake even, and there was something eager and hopeful in his face that made Claire's steps slow just a little. Ma'am, can I ask you something straight? She looked at him. Go ahead. Are we going to be okay? His voice dropped. The guys don't say it out loud, but everybody knows we're stretched too thin out here. We know command's not coming. Some of us don't think we're getting off this ridge. He swallowed hard. But then you show up and you did that. So I gotta ask, you honestly think we make it? Claire stopped walking. She looked at Danny for a long moment, and something moved behind her calm eyes, something old and painful that he was too young to recognize. Listen to me, she said quietly. I'm going to tell you the truth because you asked me straight and you deserve a straight answer. She held his gaze. I don't make promises about who lives. I made those promises once, to people I loved, and I couldn't keep them. Her voice didn't waver, but something underneath it did. So I don't say We're all gonna be fine. I don't lie to soldiers. What I'll tell you instead is this: I will stand between you and whatever comes over that ridge until I physically can't anymore. That's not a promise about the outcome. That's a promise about me. It's the only kind I make now. Danny stared at her. Who did you lose? He asked softly. For just a second, the calm cracked. Everyone, she said, and she walked away before he could ask anything else, leaving the young Marine standing in the gray dawn with the sudden terrible understanding that the woman who just saved their lives was carrying something so heavy he couldn't even imagine the shape of it. Inside the command tent, Cole was on the secure line, and he was not happy. I don't care what your clearance is, he said into the phone. I've got a soldier on my base who just made 2 shots in the dark that shouldn't be possible, and her file's been redacted down to nothing. I want to know who I'm dealing with. That's not a request. The voice on the other end was calm and bureaucratic and completely unhelpful. Commander, the soldier was assigned to you as support. Her record is classified above your level. I'd advise you to be grateful for the capability and stop asking questions. Grateful. Cole's jaw tightened. You dropped a ghost on my ridge, and you want me grateful. Let me tell you what I think. I think that name Donovan, I think it means something. I think if I dug into it, I'd find something you buried. And I think the only reason you sent her here is because you needed her capability so badly you were willing to unbury it. He waited. So which is it? Tell me she's not who I think she is. There was a long silence on the line. Commander Cole, this voice said finally, and for the first time it wasn't bored, it was careful. I'm going to give you one piece of advice, and then this conversation is over. Whatever you think you know about that woman, you know a fraction of it. And the part you don't know is the part that got a lot of good people killed. Use her. Trust her in a fight, but do not under any circumstances go looking into what happened to her team. A pause. Some doors, once you open them, you can't close again. Are we clear? Cole's grip tightened on the phone. What happened to her team? He asked. The line went dead. Cole stood there for a long moment, the dial tone humming in his ear. Then he slowly set the phone down. Her team, he said quietly to no one. So there was a team. He turned to his desk, to the thin folder, to the black bar of redaction with its 3 visible words. Presumed killed in action. And now he understood that phrase wasn't about Claire. It was about the people she'd lost. The whole file wasn't a record of a soldier. It was a headstone for everyone who died around her. Outside, the base was waking up, and Cole could hear the low murmur of his men talking about the new arrival, the shots in the dark, the old rifle. He could hear Jake Miller's voice among them, and for once the young corporal wasn't laughing. Cole picked up the folder and walked out. He found Claire near the ammunition tent, doing the same thing she'd been doing in the mess the night before, cleaning that old rifle with hands that didn't need to look. She glanced up as he approached, read his face, and set the rifle down. You called somebody, she said. It wasn't a question. I did. And they told you not to ask about my team. Cole stopped in front of her. How'd you know that? Because that's what they always tell people. She wiped her hands slowly. It's the one thing everybody agrees on. Don't ask about the team. Don't say the names. Keep it buried. Her voice was quiet and flat, and there was a whole ocean underneath it. It's easier for everybody if that mission never happened. But it did happen. Yeah, she looked up at him. It happened. Cole crouched down so they were level. He held up the folder. I'm not going to ask you what's in here, he said. I'm not going to open that door because a man smarter than me just told me not to, and I've lived long enough to know when to listen. He set the folder down between them unopened. But I'm going to tell you what I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Claire said nothing. I think you were the best at what you did, Cole said. I think you were so good that somebody sent you and your team somewhere they never should have gone on the strength of you being good enough to pull it off. And I think it went wrong. I think it went as wrong as it's possible to go. And I think you're the only one who walked out. He watched her face. And I think the reason you carry that old rifle isn't sentiment. It's a punishment. You keep it because it's the last thing you had when they died, and you won't let yourself put it down, because putting it down would feel like putting them down. Claire's hands went very still. For a long moment, she didn't speak. And when she finally did, her voice was barely audible. You should have stayed a commander, she said. You'd have made a hell of an interrogator. Am I wrong? She looked at the rifle. At the scratches in the old wood, each one a story she'd never tell. No, she said, you're not wrong. And there it was, the first crack in the wall she'd built around herself, the first honest word she'd spoken since she stepped off that truck. Cole didn't push. He'd been in enough command tents, sat with enough broken soldiers to know that you didn't pry a wound like that open. You just let a little air in and waited. They're going to come back, he said, standing. The ones you scared off last night. And when they do, it won't be scouts. No, Claire agreed, it won't. How long are them? She looked east toward the ridgeline, toward the dark country beyond it, where an enemy was right now describing to someone in charge exactly how 2 of their men had died without ever seeing the shot coming. Depends how badly I embarrassed them, she said. But I read them wrong if they let this stand. Somewhere out there, somebody just found out their scouts got dropped by one shooter on one ridge, and they've got a choice. They can decide this base is too dangerous and leave it alone. She picked the rifle back up. Or they can decide they have to take it now, hard and fast, before word gets around that a bunch of stretched, thin Marines on a forgotten outpost can't be pushed. Which one do you think they'll pick? Claire slung the rifle across her back. The one that means I killed 2 men for nothing, she said quietly, if I can't stop them. Cole watched her walk back toward the ridge, the same small figure everyone had mocked the day before moving now, through a base full of men who'd stopped laughing. He saw the way the Marine's eyes followed her. He saw Jake Miller step aside to let her pass, and for the first time nod once, a small, stiff nod of a young man who didn't know how to say he'd been wrong. Claire caught the nod. She held Jake's eyes for a second as she passed. Corporal, she said. Ma'am, Jake's voice was rough. Last night, I was the things I said. You were watching that ground with a scope that cost more than a car, Claire said, and you didn't see them, and I saw them with this. She patted the old rifle. You want to know the difference? Jake nodded slowly. The scope tells you what's there, Claire said. It doesn't tell you what's about to be there. That part you have to earn. And you earn it by being wrong and losing people and swearing you'll never be wrong the same way twice. Her voice softened just slightly. You're a good shot, Miller. Better than good. But you've been lucky enough that you've never had to become what I became to survive. And I hope to God you never do. She started to walk on, then stopped. But I need you sharp, she said without turning around. Because when they come, and they're coming, I can't hold this whole ridge alone. I'm going to need every good shot on this mountain, including yours. Now she looked back at him. So the next time you pick up that fancy rifle, you don't shoot it like a man showing off. You shoot it like a man who's got other men's lives riding on every round. You understand me? Jake straightened. Yes, ma'am, he said, and he meant it. Claire nodded once and continued up toward the ridge. Cole came up beside Jake and they both watched her go. You still think that rifle's junk? Cole asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. No, sir, he said finally. I think I was wrong about the rifle, and I think I was wrong about her. He shook his head slowly. But there's something I can't shake, sir. Something that's been bugging me since last night. Go ahead. Jake turned to face his commander and his voice dropped low. A shooter like that doesn't end up at a place like this by accident, he said. You don't take somebody who can do what she did last night and hide her on a nowhere outpost as a support specialist. That's like burying a race car in a barn. He glanced up at the ridge where Claire was settling into position. So either command doesn't know what they've got, which I don't believe, because you can't fake shooting like that. Somebody had to know, or Cole prompted. Or somebody wanted her hidden, Jake said quietly. And something changed, something bad enough that they'd rather dig up a shooter they buried than lose this ridge. He looked at Cole. Sir, what if she's not just here to help us defend the base? What if we're not the target at all? What if there's something out there they need her for, and we're just where they put her to wait for it? Cole didn't answer right away, because Jake had just put words to the exact thing that had been gnawing at him since the phone went dead in his hand. The bureaucrat's careful voice. The warning about doors that couldn't be closed. The fact that command, which never sent them anything, had sent them her. You don't unbury a ghost to guard a fence. You unbury a ghost because something out there is worth digging up the dead for. Get some rest, Corporal, Cole said finally, his voice steady even though his mind was racing. I've got a feeling we're going to need you at your best, sooner than any of us want. Jake nodded and headed off, but he glanced back at the ridge one more time before he went at the small figure and the old rifle and the whole quiet mystery of her. And high up on that ridge, Claire Donovan lay behind the rifle. Her fallen team had died beside watching the eastern country where an enemy was deciding whether to run or to come. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself feel something other than the weight of the dead. She felt the Marines below her. Young Danny with his honest, frightened questions. Loud Jake with his wounded pride. Steady old Marcus. Cole, who saw too much. A whole outpost of men who'd been left out here to die by a command that had forgotten them. Men who were still alive because of a rifle everyone had laughed at. Men she could still protect. She wasn't allowed to say the names of the people she'd lost. She wasn't allowed to explain who she'd been. She wasn't even officially supposed to still exist. But she was here, and they were breathing. And for a soldier who had spent years believing that surviving was the one unforgivable thing she'd done, that small fact they're breathing and it's because of me was the closest thing to peace she'd felt since the day her whole world had come apart in a country she was forbidden to name. She settled deeper behind the old rifle. She checked the wind, and she watched the dark line of the eastern ridge and waited for the enemy to make their choice, knowing that whatever they chose, she would be exactly where she told Danny she would be, between them and the men below, until she physically couldn't be anymore. The choice came faster than anyone expected. 2 days after the shots in the dark, the enemy made their answer clear, not with an attack, but with something worse. Silence. The kind of silence Claire had learned to fear. They stopped probing, she told Cole in the command tent standing over his map. No scouts, no movement on the ridge lines, nothing for 48 hours. That's good, isn't it? Danny Ruiz asked from the doorway. He'd taken to hovering near Claire whenever he could, like a young dog that had found something worth following. They got scared off. They're leaving us alone. No, and Claire didn't look up from the map. It's the opposite of good. When they were probing, they didn't have a plan yet. They were still figuring us out. Silence means they stopped figuring. She tapped a point on the map east of the base. It means they decided. Cole leaned over the table. Decided what? That were worth taking. She traced a line with her finger. Think about it. They lost 2 scouts to 1 shooter, and they went quiet. A smart enemy that decided we were too much trouble would have kept probing somewhere else, testing our patrols, looking for the soft spot. Instead, they pulled back completely. That's not a retreat, Commander. That's a fist closing before it swings. Marcus Bell, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, spoke up in his slow way. How long we got? Claire straightened. If I'm reading them right, they're not going to rush it. They got humiliated. That makes it personal, and personal means they want to do it clean. They'll wait until they've got enough men to be sure. Then they'll come all at once hard, and they won't stop until this base is gone, or they are. The tent went quiet. Jake Miller, who'd been leaning against the tent pole with his arms crossed, finally spoke. His voice had none of the swagger it used to. You keep saying if I'm reading them right. You said that about the scouts too, and you were dead on. He pushed off the pole. So let me ask you straight. How do you know? How do you read them like you're reading their mail? Claire looked at him for a long moment. Because I used to be the one they'd send to do exactly this, she said quietly. Take a hardened position that thought it was safe, study it, learn its habits, and then take it apart before it knew the fight had started. She held Jake's eyes. I know how they think, Corporal, because I used to think the same way. I know what they're going to do because it's what I would do. The admission landed heavy in the small space. Nobody said anything for a second. Then Cole spoke carefully. You said you were support. I lied. Claire said it flatly without apology. I told you I couldn't tell you who I am. That was the truth. But I let you believe I was less than I am because it was easier. It's not easier anymore. She looked around at the men in the tent. You're going to be in a fight for your lives in the next few days, and you deserve to know that the person telling you how to survive, it isn't a supply clerk. So here it is. I was an operator, a shooter, one of the ones they send when they can't send anyone else. Her jaw tightened. And I was good at it. Good enough that it cost me everything. The silence after that was different. It wasn't disbelief anymore. It was the silence of men recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Danny broke it first, his voice small. So the stories are true about the sniper unit, the one they whisper about. Claire's face went still. What stories? Danny glanced at the others, suddenly nervous. There's everybody's heard it. A ghost unit. Long-range operators the best there ever were. And there was supposed to be one shooter, the best of all of them went by a code name. Don't, Claire said. Silver Lynx, Danny finished too late to stop himself. The name dropped into the tent like a stone into still water. Claire went absolutely rigid. For a full 3 seconds, she didn't move, didn't breathe. And then something crossed her face that none of them had seen before, not calm, not sadness, but a raw, involuntary flinch, like the name had physically struck her. Where did you hear that name? She asked very quietly. Danny swallowed hard. It's a story, ma'am. Guys tell it, I didn't mean where. My uncle, Danny stammered. He did 2 tours before me. He said everybody in the community knew about Silver Lynx, the best shooter the military ever had. And then one day the whole unit just gone, vanished. Some mission that got buried so deep nobody ever found out what happened. And Silver Lynx died with them. He was talking fast now, unable to stop. That's the story. That's why it's a legend. Because they say the best sniper who ever lived died on some mission that officially never happened, and the military erased the whole thing. Nobody was looking at Danny anymore. They were all looking at Claire, because Claire hadn't denied it. She'd gone pale and silent and still. And every man in that tent was old enough to know that the way she'd flinched at that name wasn't the reaction of someone who'd never heard it. It was the reaction of someone who'd worn it. Cole was the first to put it into words, and he did it gently the way you'd approach something wounded. Claire, he said, look at me. She looked at him. That mission that officially never happened, Cole said. The one where the whole unit vanished. He held her gaze. That was your team, wasn't it? That's who you lost. For a long moment, Claire didn't answer. And then so quietly they had to strain to hear it, she said, they didn't vanish. The tent was dead silent. That's the story they tell, she said, and her voice was steady, but there was something breaking underneath it. That we vanished, that it was some tragic accident, some mission that just went wrong, and the whole team was lost, and it was so classified they had to bury it. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides. That's the clean version, the one that lets everybody sleep at night. The truth is uglier than that. The truth is we didn't vanish. We were sent to die. Jake's arms had dropped to his sides. What are you talking about? Claire looked at him, and for the first time the calm mask was completely gone, and what was underneath it was so raw that Jake actually took a half step back. I'm talking about a betrayal, she said. I'm talking about the fact that my team, 5 of the best people who ever put on a uniform, people I would have died for, people I begged to come home to their families, my team walked into a trap. And it wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the fog of war. It was a trap somebody set. Somebody on our side. Her voice cracked just slightly. Somebody sold us. And I've spent every day since then trying to figure out who and why, and I still don't have the whole answer, and that's why they buried me. Because I wouldn't stop asking. Cole's blood had gone cold. You're saying someone in the U.S. military deliberately walked your team into an ambush. I'm saying I watched my team die because the intelligence we were given was wrong in a way that couldn't have been an accident. Claire's eyes were bright, now wet, but her voice stayed level through sheer force of will. The position of the enemy was wrong. The extraction point was wrong. The timing was wrong. Every single thing that could have been wrong was wrong all at once in exactly the way that would guarantee we walked into the worst possible place at the worst possible time. That doesn't happen by accident, Commander. You know it doesn't, not to a team like mine. Somebody arranged it. And you survived, Cole said slowly. I survived. The words came out like a confession. I was the only one. And do you know what the worst part is? For years, I couldn't figure out why. Why me? Why did I get to walk out when they didn't? And then I understood. She laughed, and it was a terrible, hollow sound. They didn't miss me by accident either. They left me alive on purpose. Because a dead ghost is a martyr. But a live ghost who won't stop asking questions, that's a problem you can control. You can hide her, threaten her, bury her on a nowhere outpost as a support specialist and tell everyone she's dead. She looked around the tent. You can make her disappear so thoroughly that the only place she still exists is in stories young men tell each other in the dark. Danny looked like he was going to be sick. Silver Lynx is real, he whispered. You're standing right here. You're actually... That name died with my team, Claire said sharply. Don't use it again, any of you. She drew a shaky breath, forcing herself back under control. I'm Claire Donovan. That's all I am now. That's all I get to be. The tent stayed silent for a long moment. Then Marcus Bell, in his slow, steady way, said the thing none of the others had the nerve to say. If somebody on our side sold your team, he said, and they buried you to keep you quiet, then why'd they dig you back up? Why send you here? Claire looked at him, and in that moment, the same terrible thought that had been gnawing at Cole and Jake for 2 days finally crystallized in the air of that tent. That, Claire said slowly, is the question that's been keeping me up at night, Sergeant. Because you're right. They spent years making sure I stayed buried. And then out of nowhere, an order comes down. Report to Fort Raven Ridge. Bring your rifle. She shook her head. The same people who wanted me gone forever suddenly wanted me here. And I don't know why, but I know it can't be good. Because those people don't change their minds. They don't suddenly decide the ghost they buried is useful again unless something changed. Unless they need something out here badly enough to take the risk of me. Cole felt the floor drop out from under the conversation. You think this is connected, he said? The enemy massing to hit us, and them sending you. You think it's the same thing? I don't believe in coincidences, Claire said. Not anymore. The people who buried me hid me here right before an enemy force decides to come take this exact base number. Something's happening at Raven Ridge that matters to somebody very high up. Something worth unburying a dead sniper for. And whatever it is, she looked around at all of them. You men are sitting right on top of it, and you don't even know what it is. The weight of that settled over the tent like a physical thing. Jake was the one who finally broke it. So what do? We survive the attack that's coming, Claire said. One problem at a time. Because whatever the bigger game is, none of it matters if this base gets overrun in the next week. She turned back to the map, and just like that, the operator was back. The raw grief locked away again behind the cold, clear focus of someone who had learned to keep functioning while bleeding on the inside. And that's a real possibility, Commander, so I need you to hear me. You are not ready for what's coming. Cole crossed his arms. Then get me ready. For the next hour, Claire walked them through it, and every man in that tent felt his understanding of their situation get worse with each word. She showed them how the base was designed to defend against a probing enemy, not a committed assault. She showed them where the defensive lines would fold under real pressure. She showed them the eastern approach, where the terrain would let an attacking force get close before anyone could bring effective fire to bear. She showed them the command center's vulnerability, the single point of failure that if the enemy figured it out, would collapse the whole defense. How do you know they'll go for the command center? Jake asked. Because it's what I do. Claire's answer was becoming a refrain, and each time she said it, it landed heavier. You don't win a fight like this by killing every soldier. You win it by killing the ability to coordinate. Take out the command element, and a defending force turns into a bunch of scared individuals shooting in different directions. They'll come for Cole. They'll come for the radios. And the moment they do, everything falls apart unless we're ready for it. Marcus rubbed his jaw. We got maybe 40 effective shooters. If they're bringing the real force, they're bringing more than you can beat in a straight fight, Claire said bluntly. Let's not pretend otherwise. If this becomes a matter of who has more men and more firepower, you lose. Full stop. She let that land. So we don't fight the fight they want. We fight the one they don't expect. We make every foot of ground cost them. We make them afraid to advance. And we do it by making them believe there are more shooters like me up on that ridge than there actually are. There aren't any shooters like you, Danny said quietly. No, Claire agreed. There's one. And they know it now. They lost 2 scouts to prove it. So we use that. We make them think the whole ridge is full of ghosts. Every shot has to count. Every shot has to come from somewhere they didn't expect. We make them so afraid of the high ground that they hesitate. And when men hesitate in an assault, they die. And when enough of them die, the assault breaks. Cole studied her. You've done this before. Held a position you should have lost. Something flickered across Claire's face. Once. What happened? She was quiet for a moment. We held, she said, that time. She didn't say what happened the other times, and nobody asked. The planning went late into the night, And as the men filtered out one by one to catch what sleep they could, Cole noticed something that troubled him deeply, the way the Marines looked at Claire now. 2 days ago, they'd laughed at her. Now there was something in their faces that went past respect into something closer to desperate hope. They were starting to believe she could save them. And Cole, who had been leading men long enough to know how dangerous that was, pulled Jake aside as the tent emptied. "Walk with me," he said. Outside in the cold dark, Cole spoke low. "You see what's happening?" Jake nodded slowly. "They think she's going to carry us." "They think she's going to carry us," Cole agreed. "And I need you to understand why that scares me more than the enemy does." He stopped walking and faced the younger man. "One shooter can't hold a base, Jake, no matter how good she is. If every man out here is thinking, Claire's got it, Claire will handle it, then the second she's not where they need her, they fall apart. She said it herself. She can't hold the whole ridge alone. So what do? We make sure they don't put all their faith in her," Cole said, "which means you. The men respect you. They watched you go from calling her rifle junk to standing up straight when she talks. If you show them that you're getting sharper, that you're taking this seriously, that you're becoming the kind of shooter who can hold your own piece of that line, then they've got two people to believe in instead of one." He gripped Jake's shoulder. "I need you to be better than you've ever been, Corporal. Not for your pride, for them. Because when it comes, and it's going to come, there's going to be a moment where she can't be everywhere, and somebody else has to be the reason a man lives. I need that somebody to be you." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Sir," he said finally, "can I say something?" "Go ahead. 4 days ago, I would have told you I was the best shot on this mountain. I believed it." Jake's voice was rough. "Now I've watched her do things I didn't think were possible, and I've heard what she did to get that good. She lost her whole team, sir. Everybody she cared about. That's what it took to make her what she is." He shook his head. "I don't want to be that. I don't want to be good the way she's good, because I don't ever want to pay what she paid." Cole nodded slowly. "That's the wisest thing you've said since I've known you." "But I'll be sharp," Jake said. "I'll be the best I can be with what I've got, and I'll stand where you need me. I won't let her carry it alone. I promise you that." "Good man," Cole clapped his shoulder. "Get some sleep." But neither of them slept much that night, and up on the ridge, neither did Claire. The next 2 days were a race against a clock nobody could see. Claire didn't rest. She spent every waking hour turning Fort Raven Ridge into something the enemy wouldn't recognize. She moved fighting positions. She built false ones, hollow shells that looked like they held shooters, designed to draw fire and waste the enemy's attention. She walked the eastern approach again and again, memorizing every fold in the ground, every distance, every place a man could hide, and every place a man would die. And she started teaching. It began almost by accident. Danny found her sighting down the ridge one afternoon, and instead of shooing him off, she started explaining what she was doing, reading the wind, judging the distance, understanding how the light would fall at different hours. Danny listened like his life depended on it, because it did. By the next day, 3 more Marines had drifted over to listen. By the day after, it was a dozen. She didn't turn them into snipers. There wasn't time. But she taught them how to think, how to see the ground the way an attacker would see it, how to know where the enemy had to be before they got there, how to make every position count. Jake watched all of it from a distance, and then on the second afternoon, he walked over and sat down beside her without a word, his own rifle across his knees. Claire glanced at him. "Corporal, teach me," Jake said. "Not the men, me, the real stuff. Whatever it is that lets you see them before they're there." He met her eyes. "I've been the best shot on this base my whole tour, and it turns out I don't know anything. So teach me, please." Claire studied him for a moment. Something in her face softened just barely. "Sit up straight," she said. "First thing you're going to learn is that everything you think you know about shooting is about the shot itself, and the shot is the last thing that matters. By the time you take the shot, all the important decisions are already made. The shooting's easy. It's the thinking that's hard." She pointed east. "Tell me where they'll come from." Jake looked. "The east. You've said it a dozen times, the terrain." "I didn't ask what I said. I asked what you see." Her voice was patient, but firm. "Look at the ground, not with your pride, with your fear. If you had to attack this base and you knew there was a shooter up here who could kill you before you saw her, where would you come? Where would you feel safe? Where's the ground that lies to you that looks safe but isn't? Jake looked, really looked for the first time. And slowly he started to see it, the dead ground, the false safety, the places that would draw an attacker in and then leave him exposed. There, he said, pointing, that draw. It looks like cover, but once you're in it, you can't get out fast, and anybody up here has a clean line on the whole length of it. Claire almost smiled. Now you're thinking, that's a kill zone. You just found one. There are 6 of them on the eastern approach. By the time this is over, you're going to know all 6 like you know your own name. Something changed in Jake over those 2 days. Cole saw it. The men saw it. The cocky corporal who'd mocked an old rifle was becoming something steadier, something more serious. He stopped talking about equipment. He started talking about ground. And on the second night, as Claire and Jake sat together on the ridge in the dark, Jake finally asked the question he'd been holding. Your team, he said quietly. In the tent, you said somebody sold them. Somebody on our side. He hesitated. Do you know who? Claire was silent for a long time. I have a name, she finally said. One name. Someone who was in a position to arrange it. Someone who had the access and the motive, and who came out of that mission with a promotion instead of a court-martial. Her voice was flat and cold. But I can't prove it. And every time I've gotten close, the door slams shut. Files disappear. People who might talk get transferred or worse. The name's protected by something bigger than the name. She looked out at the dark. That's the real reason I stopped fighting it for a while. Not because I gave up. Because I learned that pulling that thread pulls a rope attached to a lot of powerful people, and every time I pulled it, somebody near me got hurt. So I stopped to protect the people around me. And I went quiet, and I let them bury me. Her jaw tightened, and I've hated myself for it every day since. You didn't have a choice, Jake said. There's always a choice, Claire said. I chose to protect the living over the dead. Some days I think that's the only decent thing I've done since it happened. Other days, I think it means I let my team down twice, once when I couldn't save them, and again when I stopped fighting for the truth about what happened to them. She shook her head. Don't ever get in a position where you have to choose between the dead and the living, Corporal. There's no right answer, just 2 ways to feel like you failed. Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and they sat together in the dark, 2 shooters watching the same country, and something unspoken passed between them, the beginning of trust, hard won, that would matter more than either of them knew. On the 3rd night, the enemy came, but they didn't come the way anyone expected. It started small, a single mortar round far off that landed harmlessly in the empty ground north of the base. Then another, then nothing. That's ranging fire, Claire said into the radio, already moving. They're bracketing us, getting their distances. Cole, this is the front edge of it. Everybody to positions. Now. Cole's voice came back tight. You said they'd hit the east. They will. This is theater. Claire settled into a fighting position, not her main one, a false-looking spot she'd chosen deliberately. They're going to make noise everywhere so you can't tell where the real weight is. Don't chase the noise, Commander. Hold your men. Make them wait for the real thing. For 20 agonizing minutes, chaos bloomed around the base. Fire came from the north, then the west, then the north again. Enemy fighters showed themselves in 1s and 2s, taunting, drawing fire testing to see where the Marines would commit. And through it all, Claire held her fire. Ma'am, Danny's voice crackled tight with fear. There's movement on the west wall. I've got shooters, permission to. Negative. Hold. Claire's voice was ice. That's bait. They want you looking west. Everybody watch your sectors and hold your fire until you have a real target. The first shot from the east, that's the one that matters. How do you know it's coming from the east? Because I've been standing where their commander is standing, Claire said, and from there the east is the only attack that makes sense. Everything else is a magic trick. Watch the east. The waiting was unbearable. Cole could feel his men's discipline stretching thin, every instinct screaming at them to shoot back at the muzzle flashes, taunting them from 3 directions. He got on the radio himself. All positions, this is Cole. Hold your fire. Trust the plan. Watch your sectors. Nobody shoots until we have a real target. His voice was steady, but his hand on the radio was white-knuckled. And then at 0243 by Cole's watch, the eastern approach came alive. It came all at once, exactly as Claire had said it would. A wave of attackers surging out of the dark toward the base's most vulnerable side, moving fast, moving smart, using every fold of ground, driving straight for the point where the defensive line was thinnest and the command center lay just beyond. There they are, Claire breathed. That's the real thing. Cole, they're coming for the command center, just like I said. Full weight Eastern approach. This is it. Cole's voice came back grim. Give the word. Claire watched them come. She watched the lead element flow toward the first kill zone, the draw that Jake had spotted, the ground that looked safe and wasn't. She waited and waited, letting them commit, letting them fill the trap. And then very quietly, she keyed the radio. Corporal Miller, she said, you found this one. You take the first shot. There was a pause. Then Jake's voice steady in a way it had never been before. Copy, I've got them. Wait for my mark, Claire said. Let them get deep, all the way in. When I fire, you fire. And then we teach these men to be afraid of this mountain. The lead attackers pushed deeper into the draw, packed together, exposed exactly where Claire had known they would be, exactly where she'd taught Jake to expect them. Claire settled the old rifle. She breathed out. Mark, she said. And Fort Raven Ridge erupted. The old rifle spoke first, and the lead attacker in the draw dropped mid-stride. A quarter second later, Jake's rifle cracked from 100 meters down the line, and a second man went down right beside the first. Then the whole eastern edge of Fort Raven Ridge opened up as the Marines fired into the kill zone Claire had built for them, and the front rank of the assault simply came apart. Reload and shift, Claire said calmly into the radio, already moving to her second position. Don't stay where you fired. Miller, move. Everybody move. Make them think there's a shooter on every rock. Jake was already crawling to his next spot, his heart hammering, but his hands steady. Oddly, he'd never felt anything like this, the strange cold clarity that had come over him the moment he'd taken that first shot. Everything Claire had taught him over 2 days had clicked into place at once. He wasn't showing off anymore. He wasn't the best shot on the mountain proving a point. He was a man with other men's lives riding on every round, and it had changed the way he breathed. Below in the draw, the attack had stalled. The lead element was down or pinned, and the fighters behind them had hit the ground confused, taking fire from angles they couldn't source. They're checking, Claire murmured, settling into her new position. They expected a defensive line. They didn't expect to lose their first 10 men in 6 seconds. Their commanders rethinking everything right now. At 02:47, 4 minutes into the fight, the enemy did exactly what Claire predicted. They pulled back from the draw and shifted north, trying a second approach. Ruiz, Claire said, north draw, that's your ground. What did I teach you? Danny's voice was tight with fear, but it held. It's the second kill zone. If they come up, they've got to cross the open ground at the top before they reach cover. Right. So where do you shoot them? At the top. When they're in the open, not while they're still in the draw. Good, wait for it. Let them commit. Danny waited. Claire could hear him breathing over the radio, fast and shallow, a 19-year-old kid about to do the hardest thing he had ever done. And then the enemy came up the north draw, just as she'd said, and hit the open ground at the top, and Danny fired. A man dropped. I got him, Danny said, and his voice cracked on it, shock and horror. And something else, the terrible knowledge of what he'd just done. Ma'am, I got him. Breathe, next target. There'll be time to feel it later. Claire's voice was gentle but immovable. Right now, those men behind him are still coming, and the men next to you are still alive because of what you just did. Stay with me, Ruiz. Next target. Copy, Danny said, and Claire heard him swallow hard and steady himself, and she felt a fierce, aching pride for the kid, and underneath it, a grief she didn't have time for because she'd heard that exact break in a voice before years ago from people who weren't alive anymore. The fight ground on. The enemy tried the draw, tried the north, tried a rush straight up the middle, and each time Claire read them before they committed and put fire where it hurt most. She moved constantly, never firing twice from the same place, and every time the old rifle spoke an enemy leader or a machine gun crew or a man carrying something heavy went down. The attackers began to believe the mountain was full of ghosts. They started to hesitate, and hesitation Claire had promised was death. At 03:01, Cole's voice came over the command net tight and hard. Donovan, they're bringing up vehicles. 2 technicals, eastern approach, mounted guns. That changes the math. Claire was already tracking them. She'd heard the engines before Cole called it. I see them. Hold your men off them. Those guns will chew up anybody who exposes themselves. Let me handle the vehicles. You can't stop a technical with a rifle. I can stop the man behind the gun, Claire said, and I can stop the man who takes his place. And the one after that, a vehicle's just steel until somebody's driving it and somebody's shooting it. Take away the men and it's scrap. She settled the old rifle on the lead technical, found the gunner, and breathed out. Watch. The rifle cracked. The gunner on the lead technical slumped over his weapon. Before the vehicle had even slowed, another fighter scrambled up to take his place, and Claire dropped him too. The technical swerved the driver, spooked, and Claire put her third round through the windshield. The vehicle lurched and stalled, blocking the approach, and the second technical had to slow to avoid it, which was exactly when Jake, who'd shifted to a firing position covering that ground, put a round into its gunner. Both guns down, Jake reported, and there was something like awe in his voice. Both technicals stalled on the approach. They're blocking their own advance. Now they're angry and they're stuck, Claire said. That's when they get sloppy. Watch for the men who stop thinking and start charging. Those are the ones who die first. But even as she said it, something cold moved through her. Because the enemy commander out there wasn't sloppy. He'd absorbed everything she'd thrown at him, and he was still coming. He'd lost his lead element, lost his vehicles, and he was still feeding men into the fight. And that meant one of two things. Either he had far more men than she'd estimated, or this base was worth more to him than the men he was spending on it. And Claire, who never believed in coincidences anymore, felt the shape of the larger things she'd sensed from the beginning press closer. Cole, she said low off the main net, this isn't a base raid. He's spending too many men. Nobody throws this much at a forgotten outpost. He wants something here badly enough to bleed for it. Whatever they buried me to sit on top of this is it. This is them coming for it. Cole's voice was grim. You still don't know what it is. No, but he does. And that means the moment he thinks he's losing, he's going to stop trying to take the base and start trying to reach whatever it is before we can stop him. She was moving again, repositioning. Watch for a change in their objective, Commander. The second they stop pushing the line and drive for a specific point, that's where the thing is. That's what all this is about. At 0314, the enemy changed everything. It happened the way Claire had feared. A section of the assault peeled away from the main push and drove hard for a single point, not the command center, not the barracks, but a low structure near the base's motor pool that Cole's men used for storage. They hit it with everything they had, ignoring casualties, ignoring the kill zones, throwing men into the fire with a desperation that made no tactical sense unless the building itself was the prize. There, Claire said sharply, the storage building by the motor pool. That's it. That's what they came for. Cole, what's in that building? Supplies, Cole said. Equipment. Nothing that he stopped. And then slowly in a voice Claire had never heard from him, oh God. Cole, what's in the building? There's a locked section, Cole said. In the back. It came in 6 weeks ago on a classified shipment. I was ordered not to open it, not to inventory it, not to ask about it. I was told it was being stored here temporarily, and it wasn't my concern. His voice was hollow. I didn't ask. You don't ask when the order comes from that high. I just locked it and forgot about it. Everything went very still in Claire's chest. That's why they sent me here, she said quietly, the whole thing crashing into place at once. That's the connection. It was never about the base. The same people who buried me stored something here 6 weeks ago, and then they put me on top of it. I'm not here to defend the base, Cole. I'm here to defend that building. And the enemy coming for it isn't just an enemy. They know what's in there, which means somebody told them. Her voice went cold as the grave. Somebody on our side told them. The same kind of somebody who sold my team. Over the radio, Cole was silent for a long moment. How could they know what's in a classified shipment on my base, he said slowly, unless it's the same people, Claire finished, the ones who set my team up, the ones with access to everything who come out clean every time. They put something dangerous here, and they put me here to guard it, and they let the enemy know exactly where it was, and now everybody who dies tonight dies so that a few powerful people can play a game none of us can see. Her hands tightened on the rifle. I'm done being a piece on their board. That building does not fall. Whatever's in it, whatever this is really about, is not getting into the hands of the men out there, and it is not staying in the hands of the men who put it here. Not while I'm breathing. Claire, Get your wounded back from the motor pool, she said, already moving, already shifting toward the storage building, with a speed and purpose that frightened the men who saw her go. I'm going to hold that building. Miller, you have the eastern line. It's yours now. You know the ground. Hold it. Ma'am, wait, Jake's voice cracked over the net. You can't go down there alone. That's the middle of the hole. Hold the line, Corporal, Claire said. That's an order, and I've earned the right to give it. Hold the line and keep these men alive. I'll handle the building. And then she was gone from her position, down off the high ground, into the worst of the fight. At 0319, Claire reached the storage building, and the enemy was already there. They'd overrun the outer position. 3 Marines were down, 2 wounded, 1 not moving. A squad of attackers was working at the locked rear section, and more were pouring in behind them. Claire took in the whole thing in a single sweep, and then she did the thing she'd sworn she'd never do again, the thing that had made her a legend and cost her everything. She stopped being a sniper and became a soldier in the middle of it. She dropped the first 2 attackers before they knew she was there. She hauled a wounded Marine behind cover, pressed his own hand over his wound, told him to hold it and to live, and moved on. She fought her way to the locked door, put herself between it and the men trying to breach it, and made every one of them pay to take a single step closer. Ruiz, she said into the radio, breathing hard now, the calm finally frayed by the sheer violence of it. The 2 wounded at the motor pool. I've got them stabilized, but they need to come out. Can you reach them? Ma'am, there's fire all over that ground. I can't. You can, Claire said. I taught you this ground. There's a dead angle between the fuel racks and the wall. They can't shoot you there. Move fast, stay low, and I'll cover you the whole way. Trust me, Ruiz, I have never once put you somewhere you'd die. There was a terrible pause. Copy, Danny said, and Claire heard the fear in it, and heard him beat it down and heard him move. He came across that killing ground fast and low, exactly where she'd told him, and Claire stood in the open, fully exposed, drawing every eye and every gun towards herself and away from the running kid, and put down anyone who turned to fire at him. She took a graze across the shoulder doing it. She didn't stop. Danny reached the wounded, dragged them one at a time into the dead angle and back toward the aid station, and Claire held the whole storm off him until he was clear. They're out, Danny gasped over the radio, and his voice broke completely, night tears. In it, the sound of a boy who'd just done a man's hardest work. Ma'am, they're out. You saved, you covered me the whole... You did that, Ruiz, not me. Claire pressed a hand to her bleeding shoulder and kept her rifle up. You ran through hell to get your brothers out. Remember that. That's who you are now. Up on the eastern line, Jake Miller was holding. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Without Claire's shots thinning the enemy, the assault pressed harder, and the weight of it fell on him and the men around him. But he held. He remembered everything she'd taught him, the kill zones, the ground, the discipline of the shot. He called his men's fire the way she'd called his put rounds, where they mattered, moved when he had to, and slowly, foot by foot, the eastern line held against a force that should have rolled over it. Miller, Cole said over the net. Report. Line's holding, sir. Jake's voice was ragged but steady. We're bleeding them. They can't get past us on the east, but, sir, he hesitated. She's alone at that building. It's the hottest ground on the whole base, and she's in the middle of it by herself. How long can one person hold that? Cole didn't answer because he was watching the storage building through his binoculars, and what he saw made his heart stop. The enemy had figured out what Claire had figured out. They'd realized that as long as she held the building, they couldn't take it. And so they'd stopped trying to breach the door and started trying to kill her, concentrating fire, maneuvering to flank her, throwing everything they had at one wounded woman standing between them and whatever was worth all these lives. And Claire, cornered, bleeding, outnumbered 10-1, did the thing that turned the whole battle. She stopped defending. At 0331, Claire's voice came over the command net, calm and clear and absolutely certain, and every man who heard it felt his blood run cold. Cole, listen to me carefully. They've got me pinned at the building. As long as I stay here, they'll keep pouring men at this one point, and eventually they'll get through, and your line's going to feel the pressure lift, and they'll fold. A pause. So I'm going to move. I'm going to take the most exposed position on this whole base, right up on top of the motor pool, where they can all see me, and I'm going to draw every gun they have onto myself. And while they're all looking at me, your men reorganize. Miller pushes off the eastern line. You hit them from the flank while they're staring at the wrong thing. Cole understood instantly, and it horrified him. Claire, if you go up there, there's no cover. None. They'll all shoot at me instead of at your men. Claire said, yes, that's the point. That's suicide. That's the mission. Her voice didn't waver. Cole, I need you to hear something, and I need you to believe it. For years, I thought surviving my team was the worst thing I ever did. I thought I got left alive as a punishment, but I finally understand why I lived. A long breath. I lived so I could be standing here tonight to do this, to put myself between a whole lot of good men and the thing that would kill them. That's not a punishment, Cole. That's the reason. My whole life since that mission has been leading to this exact choice, and I am not going to flinch from it. Claire, don't get your men ready, she said. When I go up, you go. Don't waste what I'm buying you. And then softer, in a voice meant only for him, tell Ruiz he's going to be a good one. Tell Miller he was never wrong about wanting to be better. He just had to figure out what better meant. And tell them both that the rifle was never the thing. It was never the thing. Claire, but she was already moving. At 0334, Claire Donovan climbed to the most exposed point on Fort Raven Ridge, stood up straight in full view of an entire enemy force and opened fire. Every gun on the field turned toward her. The fire that came at her was unlike anything, a solid wall of it, every attacker on the field trying to kill the one figure standing impossibly in the open. And Claire stood in the middle of it and worked the old rifle with a calm, terrible precision, dropping leader after leader, gunner after gunner, refusing to fall, refusing to break, buying with her own exposed body every second the Marines needed. And the Marines took those seconds and made them count. Now, Cole roared over the net, all positions, they're looking the wrong way. Hit them. Miller, push, push. Jake Miller came off the eastern line like a man possessed, and his Marines came with him. They hit the enemy flank while every attacker's attention was fixed on the woman standing in the storm, and the assault that had ground forward all night suddenly found itself taking fire from a direction it had forgotten to watch. The kill zones Claire had built came alive again. The technicals were still blocking their own retreat, and the enemy who had been so close to winning felt the whole battle turn under them at once. They're breaking, Danny shouted over the net. Ma'am, they're breaking. It's working. But Claire couldn't answer because Claire had taken a hit. Cole saw it through the binoculars, saw her stagger, saw her go down to one knee, and his heart went with her. But she came back up. Bleeding slower, she came back up and she found her position again, and she kept firing because the battle wasn't won yet, because there was one more thing that had to happen. The enemy commander. He'd been directing the whole assault from a covered position at the rear, and now, with his attack collapsing, he broke from cover to rally his men one last time to force one final push before the whole thing fell apart. He stepped into the open, shouting, gathering his fighters for a last charge at the building. And Claire, on one knee, bleeding at the absolute end of her strength, saw him. Miller, she breathed into the radio so quiet it was almost nothing. The commander, rear position. He just came into the open. He's mine. Ma'am, you're hit. Let me... He's mine, Corporal. Her voice was fading, but it held. This one's mine. I've been waiting a long time to make a shot like this count for something. She raised the old rifle one more time. Her hands were shaking now from blood loss, from exhaustion, from the sheer impossible weight of everything she'd carried to this moment. She thought about her team. She thought about the names she wasn't allowed to say. She thought about Danny running through hell and Jake becoming who he was meant to be, and Cole, who'd seen the truth of her and never once flinched from it. She breathed out. The shaking stopped, and she fired. The old rifle, the one everyone had laughed at, the one Jake had called junk, the one she'd carried through years of exile because putting it down would have meant putting down the dead, spoke one last time. Across the field, the enemy commander fell, and the assault on Fort Raven Ridge died with him. It collapsed all at once, the way a thing collapses when the will holding it up is gone. The attackers who could run, ran. The battle that had raged since 0243 was over by 0341, and Fort Raven Ridge, the forgotten outpost that should have been overrun, still stood. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence after the guns was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. Then Cole was running. He crossed the base at a dead sprint, up toward the exposed position where Claire had made her stand, terror in his chest, certain of what he'd find. Jake was already climbing toward her from the other side. Danny was scrambling up behind Cole, and they reached her at the same time and found her there down the old rifle still in her hands, her blood dark on the ground beneath her. "No," Jake said, dropping to his knees beside her. No, come on, stay with me, stay with..." Claire's eyes were open. Barely, but open. "Did it work?" she whispered. "It worked." Cole said, his voice breaking, his hands pressing hard against the worst of her wounds. "You did it, the base is safe. Every man's alive because of you. Now you stay with us. You hear me? That's an order, Donovan. You do not get to do this. You do not get to save us all and then leave." Claire's mouth moved, something that might have been a smile. "Told you," she breathed. "The rifle was never the thing." And then her eyes drifted closed. "Medic!" Cole roared, louder than the guns had been, louder than anything. "I need a medic up here right now. She is not dying on this ridge. Do you hear me? Not on this ridge." Jake had both hands pressed to a wound in her side, and there were tears streaming down his face, the cocky corporal who'd mocked her 4 days ago, now begging a woman he'd learned to love like a sister to keep breathing. Danny knelt on her other side, holding her hand, saying her name over and over, the way she'd said his, through the fight to keep him steady, trying to give her back the same anchor she'd given him. And Claire Donovan Silver Lynx, the ghost. The military buried the woman who'd spent years believing that surviving was the one unforgivable thing she'd done. Lay on the ridge she'd saved, surrounded for the first time in years by people who were fighting with everything they had to keep her in the world. Her chest rose, fell, rose again, shallow and slow. She was still breathing, barely, but she was still breathing. She was still breathing when the medic reached her, and she was still breathing 4 hours later when the sun came up over Fort Raven Ridge, and every man on that base held that fact like it was the only thing keeping them upright. The medic, a young corpsman named Torres, worked on her right there on the ridge, then in the aid station, then didn't leave her side for the rest of the night. Cole didn't leave either. He sat on a crate outside the aid tent with his hands still stained with her blood, and he refused every suggestion that he go rest. "She held that building alone," he said to no one in particular, when Marcus tried to get him to sleep. "She stood up in the open and let a whole enemy force shoot at her so my men could live. I'm not going to sleep while she's fighting for hers. That's not how it works, Marcus." Marcus didn't argue. He just brought Cole a cup of coffee and sat down beside him, and the two old Marines waited together in the gray dawn. At 07:10, Torres came out of the aid tent, and every man nearby went rigid. "She's stable," Torres said, and the exhaustion in his voice couldn't hide the relief. "For now, she lost a lot of blood. The wound in her side was bad, an inch over, and I'd be telling you something different. But she's tough. God, she's tough. I've never seen anybody hold on like that." He shook his head. "She should be gone, sir. By everything I know, she should be gone. She just wouldn't." Cole closed his eyes. "But she'll live. If we can get her to a real hospital, and if nothing changes in the next day, yeah, I think she'll live." Torres hesitated. "She's awake, sir. Barely. She's asking for you." Cole was on his feet before Torres finished the sentence. Inside, Claire looked terrible pale, wrapped in bandages, hooked to lines. But her eyes found Cole when he came in, and there was still something clear and steady in them, even now. "You look like hell," she whispered. "You should talk," Cole said, pulling a crate up beside her. His voice was rough. "You went up on that motor pool and they stood in the open, Claire. You know what that was. You knew when you did it." "I knew." "You were ready to die." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I was ready to do what needed doing," she said. "That's not the same thing. I wasn't trying to die, Cole. I've spent enough years half wanting to. That's not what that was." Her eyes held his. "For the first time in a long time, I wanted to live through something. I just wanted the men to live through it more. So I did the math, and the math said if one of us had to stand in the open, it should be the one who'd already made peace with it and who could hit what she aimed at while everybody was shooting at her." A faint, tired smile. "Turned out I wanted to come back from it after all. Funny how that works. You spend years not caring if you make it, and then one night you find a reason, and suddenly you're clinging to a ridge with both hands." Cole's throat worked. "The men," he said. "You should see them. Ruiz hasn't left the aid tent since they carried you in. Miller's been standing outside all night like a guard dog. They're not going to say it right because they're young and they're Marines and they don't have the words. But you should know what you did to those boys. What did I do to them? You gave them something to believe in, Cole said, and then you nearly died proving it was real. That's a heavy thing to give young men, Claire. They're never going to be the same. Claire looked away. That's what scares me, she said softly. I've seen what happens to people who believe in me. They end up in the ground. And there it was, the thing Cole had known was underneath all of it, the wound that never healed. He'd promised himself he wouldn't push. But she was lying here, having nearly given her life for his men, and he found he couldn't let it lie anymore. Claire, he said, I think it's time you told me the whole thing. Not because I have a right to it, because you've been carrying it alone for years and I watched you try to die with it, still locked up inside you, and I can't sit here and let you keep doing that to yourself. He leaned forward. Tell me about your team. Tell me what happened. All of it. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't. She stared at the roof of the aid tent, and her jaw worked, and he could see her deciding whether to open the door she'd kept shut for years. And then quietly at 07:24 in the morning after the battle, Claire Donovan finally told the whole story. There were 6 of us, she began, counting me. We weren't just a unit. We were a family. You have to understand that first or none of the rest makes sense. When you do what we did, go where we went, you stop belonging to the regular world. You only really belong to each other. Those 5 people were everything I had, everything I was. She said their names then. Not the code names, not the sanitized versions in whatever files still existed. Their real names, the ones she wasn't supposed to say, the ones she'd carried like stones for years. And Cole understood that saying them out loud to another living person was the hardest and bravest thing he'd watched her do, harder than the ridge, harder than the open ground. Danny reminds me of the youngest one, she said, and her voice caught for the first time. Same eagerness. Same way of asking questions like, the answers actually matter. Every time that kid opens his mouth, I hear a ghost. She closed her eyes. That's why I couldn't shake him off when he started following me around. I should have. It's dangerous letting the living wear the faces of the dead. But I couldn't. Cole waited. We got a mission, Claire went on. High value, the kind that comes down through channels so quiet you never see a face, just orders. We were told it was clean, good intelligence, solid support, a clear extraction plan. Everything by the book. Her hands tightened on the blanket, and every single piece of it was a lie. The intelligence was wrong, Cole said. The intelligence was designed to be wrong. The steel came back into her voice, cold and precise. I've had years to take it apart, Cole. Years, and there is no version of what happened that's an accident. The enemy strength we were given was a fraction of what was actually there. The extraction point they routed us to was the one place the enemy had covered. The timing put us in the open at the exact moment their forces were positioned to hit us. Every error stacked in exactly the same direction, the direction that guaranteed we'd die. You don't get that from bad luck. You get that from a plan. Someone fed you to them, Cole said quietly. Someone fed us to them. She opened her eyes and they were wet, but her voice stayed level. We walked into it clean, trusting our own people, and they closed the trap. And I watched, her voice finally cracked all the way through. I watched them die, Cole, one at a time. I watched the youngest one go first. I held him and I told him he was going to be fine, that we were going to get out, that I'd get him home to his mother, and I lied to him the same way Command lied to us because I couldn't stand to let him die knowing the truth. And then he was gone, and then they all were, all of them, and I was the only one left. The aid tent was silent except for the hum of the medical equipment. Why you? Cole asked very gently. Why did you survive? That's the question that nearly killed me all by itself, Claire said. For years I thought it was random. Then I thought it was punishment that I lived so I'd have to carry it. But I finally understand it now, and it's uglier than either of those. She looked at him. They needed a survivor. A dead team is a tragedy, a mission that went wrong, and eventually people stop asking about tragedies. But a live survivor who knows the intelligence was rigged. That's a loose end. And you don't kill a loose end like me, because if I turn up dead too, somebody might finally ask the right questions. No, you keep me alive and you make me disappear. You bury me somewhere quiet, you classify my whole existence, And you make sure that if I ever try to tell the truth, there's no record I was ever real. I become a ghost story. Silver Lynx, the legend who died with her team. Her voice dropped. The perfect prison. I was alive and I was buried both at once for years. Cole felt something cold and furious build in his chest. You know who did it. I have a name, she said it flatly. One person who was in a position to arrange all of it. Access, motive, and a career that took off right after the mission that should have ended it. Every road leads back to that name, and every road is blocked before I can reach the end of it. Files vanish, witnesses transfer, and the 2 or 3 times I got close enough to matter, she paused. People around me got hurt. Not me, never me. They're careful never to touch me because a dead silver lynx is a problem. But the people near me, fair game. That's how they taught me to stop, not by threatening me, by threatening everyone I stood next to. So you stopped, Cole said. So I stopped, Claire said, and the shame in it was terrible. I went quiet. I let them win. I told myself I was protecting the living instead of chasing the dead. And maybe that was even true, but it never stopped feeling like I was letting my team down a second time. First, I couldn't save them. Then I couldn't get them justice. And I've carried both of those every single day since. She looked at Cole. Now, do you understand why I couldn't tell you who I was? It was never about clearance. It's that saying it out loud makes it real. And real means I have to feel it, and I've spent years making sure I don't feel it, because feeling it all at once would break me in half. Cole was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something between grief and rage. And then those same people dug you up, he said, sent you here, put you on top of that building. He shook his head slowly. Claire, do you understand what that means? The people who buried you needed you badly enough to unbury you, which means whatever's in that building matters more to them than keeping their secret buried. And it means, he stopped. Say it, Claire said. It means they knew there was a good chance you'd die here, Cole said it quietly. They sent you into a base an enemy was about to overrun to guard something they'd apparently told that enemy about. Claire, they didn't unbury you to use you. They unburied you to finish the job, to get their loose end killed in combat cleanly where nobody would ever ask a question. You dying on my ridge defending their secret cargo that solves every problem they have all at once. The words hung in the air. And Claire, who had figured out most of it already, who had known from the moment she stepped off that truck that something was wrong, heard the last piece click into place and went very still. That's why the order came out of nowhere, she said slowly. That's the piece I couldn't fit. Why now after all these years? And that's it, isn't it? It was never that they suddenly needed me. It's that they finally found the perfect way to be rid of me. A terrible, hollow laugh. They didn't just want me dead, Cole. They wanted me dead as a hero, killed in action defending the country. Story closes clean, legend confirmed, and the truth about my team stays buried forever right along with me. She stared at the ceiling. God, it's almost elegant. But it didn't work, Cole said fiercely. You're alive. You held the building, you held it, and you lived. And now that thing is still on my base, and you're still breathing, and their perfect plan is lying in pieces. For now, Claire said. For now, Cole, but think about what that means. Their plan failed. The enemy didn't take the building. I didn't die. And people like that, she met his eyes. They don't accept a failed plan. They adjust. And now they've got a bigger problem than they started with, because now there's a base commander who knows there was classified cargo he wasn't supposed to ask about, and a whole outpost full of Marines who watched a buried ghost come back and save their lives. Her voice was quiet and grim. You're not a bystander anymore, Cole. The second you started asking what was in that building, you became a loose end too, and so did every man who fought last night. Cole had known that already somewhere in the back of his mind, but hearing her say it made it real. Then we have a problem, he said. We have a lot of problems, Claire said, but we also have something they never counted on. What's that? Witnesses, Claire said. Dozens of them, a whole base full of Marines who watched everything and who owe their lives to it. A hard light came into her tired eyes. For years, the reason they could bury the truth was that there was only me. One ghost, one story, no proof, easy to dismiss as a broken survivor's paranoia. But now Now there's a base full of men who saw an enemy come straight for a classified shipment they should never have known about. That's not one voice anymore, Cole. That's a chorus. And a chorus is a lot harder to bury than a ghost. Outside the aid tent, the men of Fort Raven Ridge were beginning to grasp in pieces some part of what had happened. They didn't have the whole picture, but they knew the enemy had driven for that storage building with a desperation that made no sense. They knew Cole had gone pale when Claire named it, and they knew the woman who'd saved them all was lying in the aid tent because of whatever was locked in the back of it. Jake Miller had been standing outside all night, and when Cole finally came out at 0812, the young corporal was on him instantly. She's going to make it, Cole said, stable if we can get her out to a real hospital. The relief that broke across Jake's face was total unguarded, the relief of a young man who'd been holding his breath for hours. He turned away for a second, jaws working, getting himself under control. When he turned back, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. Sir, he said, whatever that building is, whatever this whole thing really is. He glanced toward it, then back to Cole. The men are talking. They know something's wrong. They know she nearly died over a shipment none of us were supposed to know about. And they're starting to ask questions I don't know how to answer. He squared up. So I'm asking you straight, sir, the way she taught me to ask things straight. What's going on? Because those men bled last night, and if they bled for something dirty, they deserve to know. Cole looked at the young corporal, really looked at him, and saw how much he'd changed in 4 days. The cocky kid who'd mocked an old rifle was gone. In his place stood a Marine who'd held a line, who'd learned to shoot like lives depended on it because they did, who was now standing here demanding the truth on behalf of his men. Come with me, Cole said. Get Ruiz and Bell. I'm only going to say this once, and I'm going to say it to the people who earned the right to hear it. They gathered in Cole's tent, Cole, Jake, Danny, and Marcus, and Cole told them. Not everything Claire had told him, some of it wasn't his to give. But enough. The classified shipment he'd been ordered not to open. The enemy driving for it like they knew exactly what it was. The impossible fact that they must have been told. And the woman who'd been sent to guard it by the same people who'd apparently made sure the enemy knew where to find it. He watched the understanding land on their faces one at a time, and he watched something cold and angry replace the exhaustion. Danny spoke first, and his young voice shook with it. You're saying somebody on our side set this up. Somebody who wanted her to die here. Somebody who used all of us, used me as part of getting rid of her. He looked sick. I ran through that fire last night, sir. I killed men. She stood in the open and took a bullet covering me. And you're telling me the whole thing was some game to some people back home who wanted her dead? I'm telling you, that's what it looks like, Cole said quietly. And I'm telling you because you earned the truth and because you need to understand something. The danger to this base isn't over. It might have just started. Marcus, in his slow, steady way, cut to the heart of it. Then what do we do about it? And Cole, who'd been turning that exact question over all night, gave them the only answer he had. We keep her alive, he said. First and most important, we keep Claire Donovan alive, because she's the only person who knows the whole story and she's the proof it's true. They spent years making her a ghost. We're going to make her a witness. Whatever it takes. He looked around at them, and every one of you is part of it now. What you saw last night, what you know that matters. They could bury one voice. They can't bury all of ours. Not if we hold together. Not if we make sure the truth gets out through so many mouths they can't silence it. The tent was silent, and then one by one the men nodded. Over the next 2 days as the base recovered, and as they waited for the evacuation that would carry the worst of the wounded Claire among them out to a real hospital, something shifted at Fort Raven Ridge. The men who'd survived the battle became something more than a garrison. They became guardians. They took turns outside the aid tent without being asked. They watched the perimeter with a new intensity because they understood now that the threat might not only come from outside the wire. And Claire slowly began to heal. On the second day, Jake came to see her alone. He stood awkwardly by the cot for a moment, turning his cap in his hands before he finally spoke. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not for the rifle. I already said sorry for that. He swallowed. For thinking I understood anything. 4 days ago, I thought being good was about being better than everybody else. Gear, skill, confidence. I thought that's what made a warrior. He shook his head. Then I watched you stand up in the open so a 19-year-old kid could live, and I finally got it. It was never about being the best shooter, was it? The rifle was never the thing. Claire smiled faintly. No, she said, it never was. So what was it? Jake asked. What made you you? Because it wasn't that rifle. I know that now. I called it junk, and I was wrong about the rifle, but I was wrong in the other direction too. I thought the rifle was the thing, and then I thought you were dangerous because of your skill. But that's not it either, is it? Claire was quiet for a moment. You want to know what made me dangerous, she said. It wasn't the rifle. It wasn't even the skill, though the skill was real. It was that I was willing. She held his eyes. Willing to risk everything I had to protect the people next to me. That's the whole secret, Miller. A gun in the hands of someone who won't risk themselves is just noise. But a person who's decided that other people's lives matter more than their own, that's the most dangerous thing on any battlefield. Not because they can take a life, because they'll give theirs. Men can feel that. The enemy could feel it last night. It's why they broke. They weren't beaten by a rifle. They were beaten by people who decided they weren't going to lose each other. Jake absorbed that. And then quietly he said the thing he'd come to say. I don't ever want to lose a team the way you lost yours, he said. But if I ever have to stand where you stood in the open, everything on the line, everybody counting on me, I want to be the kind of person who does it anyway. Like you did. He met her eyes. You taught me that in 4 days, and I'm not going to forget it. Something moved in Claire's face, something that looked almost like the beginning of peace. That night alone in the aid tent, she found herself thinking about the youngest one on her team, the one Danny reminded her of. For years, she'd carried his death like an accusation proof that she'd failed the people who trusted her. But lying there on that ridge, having watched Danny run through fire and live, having watched Jake become someone worth being, she felt the accusation loosen just slightly. Maybe honoring the dead didn't have to mean drowning in them. Maybe it could mean this instead, taking what they'd given her, the skill and the code and the fierce love of the people beside her, and using it to keep other young men alive. Maybe the youngest one's face on Danny wasn't a haunting. Maybe it was a second chance. I couldn't save you, she whispered to a ghost only she could see. But I saved him. I saved all of them. And maybe that has to be enough. Maybe that's how I carry you now. Not by dying with you, by keeping other people from having to. For the first time in years, when she thought of her team, the grief didn't come alone. It came with something beside it, not forgiveness, not yet, but the first fragile sense that she might be allowed to keep living. That surviving might not be the crime she'd spent years believing it was. That maybe, just maybe, she'd survived for a reason, and the reason was lying wounded in the cots around her still breathing because she'd been there. At 600 on the third morning, the evacuation birds came in. Cole rode out to the landing zone with her. As they loaded her stretcher, he leaned down close. This isn't over, he said quietly. You know that. They wanted you dead and you're not. They're going to come at this again one way or another. But Claire, you're not alone this time. You hear me, for years you carried this by yourself. Not anymore. Every man on this ridge is with you now. And I'm going to make sure the truth about your team sees daylight if it's the last thing I do. That's a promise, not about the outcome. About me, the only kind that counts. Claire looked up on him, this weathered commander who'd seen through her from the first minute, who'd sat with his hands in her blood through the night, who was giving her back her own words. You know what the worst part of being buried was, she said softly. It wasn't the silence. It was the loneliness. Being the only one who knew, the only one who remembered, the only one carrying all of it. I thought I'd die that way, alone with it. Her hand found his and held on. I don't feel alone anymore, Cole. Whatever happens next. For the first time since that mission, I don't feel alone. And you gave me that. All of you did. The rotors spun up. Cole squeezed her hand once hard and stepped back. And as the bird lifted off the ridge that Claire Donovan had saved carrying the ghost, the military had buried out toward a hospital in a future none of them could yet see, the men of Fort Raven Ridge stood below and watched her go. Not as the strange newcomer they'd mocked, not as a legend or a code name or a story, but as one of their own. As the person who'd stood between them and death and refused to move, and as the reason they were alive to watch her leave it all. Jake Miller stood at the front of them, his old cockiness gone forever, his hand raised in a salute he held until the bird was a speck against the sky. And in the storage building behind them, still locked, still waiting, sat the thing that had started all of it, the secret worth bearing a hero. For the reason the enemy had come, the loose thread that nobody had yet dared to pull. But that was a fight for another day. Today she was alive. Today they all were. And for a woman who'd spent years believing that surviving was the one thing she could never be forgiven, for being alive, truly fully alive with people who would fight for her, the way she'd fought for them, was the beginning of something she'd stopped believing she'd ever have again. A way home. The way home turned out to be longer and stranger than any of them expected. Claire spent 3 weeks in the hospital, and for the first 2 of them, Cole didn't hear a word about what was happening to her. Then the call started the same careful bureaucratic voices he'd tangled with before telling him the matter was being handled at levels above his clearance, telling him to focus on his base, telling him in the polite language people use when they're really making a threat, that the events at Fort Raven Ridge were classified and best left alone. Cole didn't leave them alone. He'd made a promise on that landing zone, and Nathan Cole was not a man who broke promises. He wrote everything down, every detail of the battle, the classified shipment, the enemy's impossible knowledge of it. He got sworn statements from Jake, from Danny, from Marcus, from every Marine who'd seen anything. He built a record so thorough and so widely witnessed that no single order could make it vanish. They're going to try to bury this the way they buried her, he told Jake one night, the 2 of them going over the statements by lamplight. The way they've buried everything, one report they can lose, one witness they can discredit. But 40 statements from 40 Marines all matching, that's not a ghost story anymore. That's a paper trail, and paper trails have a way of finding daylight whether powerful people want them to or not. You think it'll work? Jake asked. You think anybody up there actually cares about the truth? I don't know, Conti admitted, but I know this. For years, Claire fought this alone, and alone she lost every time. The whole trick they used on her was isolation, make her the only voice, and a lone voice is easy to silence. He tapped the stack of statements. We just made her not alone, and that changes the math. It has to. What none of them knew, what they wouldn't learn until later, was that the thing in the storage building had changed the math even more than Cole's statements. Because when the classified cargo was finally recovered and examined by people who weren't part of the scheme, questions got asked that couldn't be unasked. Why was that shipment there? Who ordered it? Who knew about it? And how in the name of God had an enemy force come straight for it on the exact night a legendary sniper, a woman the record said had died years ago, happened to be assigned to guard it? The questions climbed, and they climbed toward the one name Claire had never been able to reach. At 1400 on a gray afternoon 5 weeks after the battle, Claire got a visitor in her hospital room. She was sitting up by then, healing, restless in the way that active people always are when their bodies force them to be still. When the door opened, she expected a nurse. Instead, a man in a suit walked in, the kind of man who moved through the world like doors opened for him because they always had. She knew who he was before he said a word. She'd studied that face for years. She'd traced every road that led back to it and been stopped every time. The name she'd never been able to prove, the access in the motive and the career that took off right after the mission that killed her team. Here he was standing in her hospital room, looking down at her with an expression that tried to be sympathetic and only managed to be cold. Ms. Donovan, he said, I'm glad to see you recovering. Claire didn't answer for a moment. When she did, her voice was very calm. You have a lot of nerve, she said, coming to see the loose end you tried to tie off. Something flickered behind his eyes, surprised that she knew quickly hidden. I don't know what you think you know. I know all of it, Claire said quietly. I've known for years. I just could never reach you. Every time I got close, you slammed a door. She held his gaze without flinching. But you came here anyway, to this room, to me, and I've been in this business long enough to know what that means. It means the doors are closing on you now, aren't they? It means something got out, something you couldn't control. And you came here to find out how much I've told and to whom. His jaw tightened. The mask slipped just slightly, and underneath it she saw exactly what she'd expected, a man who'd spent years feeling untouchable, discovering that the ground had shifted under him. You have no idea how much bigger this is than you, he said low and hard. You never did. You were a tool. Your whole team was a tool. Assets get expended. That's the job. That's what you signed up for. And whatever you think you figured out, whatever those Marines think they saw, none of it matters because none of you can prove a single thing. That used to be true, Claire said. She let the words hang there. For years that was true, she went on. It was just me. One survivor, one story, no proof, easy to bury. You made sure of that. You made me a ghost, and ghosts can't testify. She leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, there was steel in her voice. But you made a mistake. You got greedy. You decided that instead of just keeping me buried, you'd use me one more time. Get me killed clean in combat, defending your dirty little shipment, and close the file forever. It was almost elegant. I'll give you that. Her eyes were cold. Except I didn't die. And now there's a base full of Marines who watched an enemy come straight for cargo they were never told about. There's a commander who's written it all down. There are 40 sworn statements, and there's a shipment that's now in the hands of people who are asking exactly the questions you spent years making sure nobody could ask. The color drained from his face. You're not here to threaten me, Claire said. You're here because you're scared, because for the first time in years, you're the one who can't close the door. She sat back. It's over. You just don't know it yet, but I think somewhere in there you're starting to feel it. For a long moment, he said nothing. And then without another word, he turned and walked out, and Claire watched him go, and she understood that she just watched a powerful man realize the ground had given way beneath him. She should have felt triumph. She'd waited years for it. Instead, she felt something quieter and more complete, the sense of a weight carried alone for so long, finally beginning to lift because she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. It didn't happen fast, and it didn't happen cleanly. Justice for something buried that deep never does. But over the following months, the thing came apart. The questions about the shipment led to questions about the mission that had killed her team. Cole's paper trail surfaced at exactly the right moment. The sworn statements couldn't be dismissed as one broken survivor's paranoia because they weren't one voice. They were a chorus exactly as Claire had said they'd have to be. Doors that had been slammed for years finally opened because the people trying to hold them shut had at last run out of ways to make the truth disappear. The man in the suit did not survive the reckoning. Neither did several others whose names Claire had never even known, a whole quiet network that had traded lives like currency and called it the job. It wasn't a courtroom drama with a triumphant verdict. It was quieter than that and in some ways emptier. Careers ended, files reopened, the record was corrected. Her team, listed for years as lost in a tragic accident that officially never happened, was finally acknowledged for what they'd been, good people betrayed, sent to die by their own side. Claire went to the place where their names were finally set down properly. She stood there a long time. She said their names out loud, all 5 of them, the way she'd said them to Cole in the aid tent, and this time saying them didn't break her. This time it felt like keeping a promise. I got you the truth, she told them quietly. It took years. I stopped believing I ever would, but I got there. You're not a story anymore. You're not a ghost. People know what happened to you now, and they know it wasn't your fault, and they know you were the best of us. Her throat tightened. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I never stopped. I want you to know that. Even when I went quiet, even when I let them bury me somewhere in me, I never stopped. She touched the names. I hope that's enough. I hope wherever you are, you can finally rest. And for the first time since the day she'd survived them, Claire Donovan felt like maybe she could rest too. But rest, it turned out, was not what she was made for. The choice came at the end of it all. Once the dust had settled and the truth was on the record and the men who traded lives had answering for it, Claire was offered something she'd never expected, a clean slate. Her record restored, her name cleared, the freedom to walk away from all of it and disappear into a quiet life, the kind of life she'd told herself for years she'd wanted. No more war, no more ridges, no more standing in the open while men shot at her. She could vanish the way she'd once been forced to vanish, except this time by choice, and no one would ever ask anything of her again. For a while, she thought she'd take it. She was tired. She'd earned rest. She'd carried more than any person should have to carry. And here finally was permission to set it all down. Part of her ached for it, for silence, for a small, quiet life somewhere. No one knew what a rifle was for. And then Cole came to see her. He'd rotated home by then, his deployment ended, and he tracked her down the way old commanders track down soldiers they refused to lose touch with. He found her sitting alone, the old rifle beside her. She still had it, still kept it close, though it meant something different now than it had. I heard they offered you a way out, he said, sitting down across from her. A quiet life. No more of any of this. They did. You going to take it? Claire looked at the rifle. I don't know, she said honestly. Part of me wants to. God, Cole, part of me is so tired. I've been fighting since I was barely older than Danny. I lost my team. I spent years buried. I nearly died on your ridge. Haven't I earned the right to just stop? You've earned it more than anyone I've ever known, Cole said quietly. Nobody would blame you for taking it. Not me, not the men. You could walk away right now and every one of us would understand. He paused. But I didn't come here to talk you into rest, Claire. I came here to ask you a hard question because I think you need somebody to ask it, and I think I'm one of the only people left who's earned the right. Ask it. When you were on that ridge, Cole said, standing in the open, everything on the line, buying time with your own body so my men could live. Were you tired then? Claire went still. Were you tired then? Cole pressed. Or did you feel more alive in that moment than you'd felt in years? Because I watched you, Claire. I watched you go up on that motor pool, and you weren't a broken survivor looking for a way to die. You were the most purposeful human being I've ever seen. You'd found the exact reason you were on this earth and you were doing it, and there was something in you that was, I don't know how else to say it, that was finally home. He held her eyes. So here's my hard question. Is a quiet life rest for you? Or is it just a different kind of grave? The words landed hard because they were true and Claire had been avoiding them. That's not fair, she said quietly. No, Cole agreed. It's not, but it's honest. And I think you've had enough people be gentle with you. I think what you need is somebody to be honest. He leaned forward. Claire, you keep thinking your only value is holding a rifle, that you're only useful when you're the one in the open taking the shot. But you're wrong, and I can prove it. And I've been trying to figure out how to say this to you for months. He took a breath. A great soldier can save a handful of lives. You've saved more than most. But you're not just a great soldier anymore. You're the person who took a 19-year-old kid named Danny Ruiz and turned him into someone who could run through fire and live. You took a cocky corporal who called your rifle junk and turned him into a Marine who understands what being a warrior actually means. In 4 days, Claire, imagine what you could do with 4 years. Claire was quiet. A great soldier saves dozens, Cole said. A great teacher saves thousands. Every Marine you train, every young person you turn into someone who understands that the strongest warrior isn't the one who never breaks, but the one who finds a reason to stand back up. Every one of them goes on to save others. And those people save others. That's not a smaller life than the Ridge, Claire. That's a bigger one. That's the biggest thing a person like you could possibly do. He sat back. The military's been trying to figure out what to do with you now that you're a legend they can't bury anymore. They'll offer you a training role if you want it, teaching the next generation. The best of the best learning from the best there ever was. He held her gaze. The question is whether you can let yourself believe you're worth more standing up than lying down. Claire looked at the old rifle for a long time. When I lost my team, she said slowly, I told myself surviving was the unforgivable thing, that I got left alive as a punishment, and I built my whole life around that. Every risk I took, every time I stood in the open part of me, was hoping the debt would finally get called in, that I'd finally get to pay for surviving. She looked up. You knew that. On the ridge, you knew that's what I was doing. I knew, Cole said. That's why I ran up that hill screaming for a medic. Because I wasn't going to let you pay a debt you never owed. I never owed it, Claire repeated softly like she was testing whether she could believe it. That's the thing I couldn't see for years. I thought honoring them meant destroying myself slowly, carrying them by refusing to live. And it took a base full of Marines nearly getting me killed to figure out that's not honoring anyone. That's just a second tragedy stacked on the first one. She wiped at her eyes. They didn't die so I could throw my life away in their memory. They died believing in something, protecting people. That was the whole point of us. And the way I honor that isn't by joining them, it's by continuing it. By protecting people, Cole said. By protecting people, Claire agreed. And if I can teach 1,000 young Marines to do it, if I can put a piece of my team into every one of them, the way I put a piece into Danny and Jake, then my team doesn't end with me. They keep going through everyone I teach forever. Her voice steadied. That's not a grave, Cole. That's the opposite of a grave. That's how you make the dead immortal. Cole smiled, the first easy, full smile she'd ever seen from him. "So that's a yes," he said. Claire picked up the old rifle. She turned it in her hands, the scratched wood, the years of it, the weight of everyone it had outlived. For so long it had been a punishment she wouldn't put down. Now looking at it, she finally understood what it really was. "Yeah," she said, "that's a yes." She stayed. Claire Donovan, the ghost the military had buried, the legend young men whispered about in the dark. The woman everyone had once mocked for carrying an old rifle became a teacher. She trained the next generation, and she trained them like the lives they'd someday hold depended on it, because they did. She taught them precision and discipline, and how to read the ground with their fear instead of their pride. But more than any of that, she taught them the things she'd learned the hard way, the things she made sure every single one of them understood before they ever left her. The strongest warriors, she told them, are not the ones who never break. Everyone breaks. She'd broken. She'd been broken so completely that for years she'd stopped believing she was allowed to live. The strongest warriors are the ones who find a reason to stand back up, who take the worst thing that ever happened to them and turn it into the reason they protect somebody else, who understand that the greatest weapon on any battlefield was never the rifle in their hands. It was the person who carried it, the person willing to risk everything for the man beside them. Jake Miller came to see her graduate her first class. He was a sergeant now on his own path, and he stood in the back and watched her hand each young Marine the same lesson that had remade him in 4 days on a ridge in Afghanistan. Afterward, he found her. "They don't know how lucky they are," he said, "getting you from the start. I had to learn it the hard way. Called your rifle junk and everything." He grinned. "Worst mistake I've ever made. Best thing that ever happened to me." "You'd have gotten there," Claire said. "You had it in you. I just held the door open." "That's all teaching is, isn't it?" Jake said, holding the door open. "That's all any of it is," Claire agreed. Danny came to when he could. He'd grown into himself steady, where he'd once been eager and frightened. And every time Claire looked at him, she saw the same thing she'd always seen a ghost from her old team wearing a living man's face. But it didn't haunt her anymore. It comforted her. Because the youngest one she'd lost, the one she'd held while she lied to him about getting home, hadn't ended in the dirt after all. Something of him had walked out of that war in Danny Ruiz, and Danny would carry it forward and someday teach it to someone else. That was how the dead stayed alive. Not in graves, in the living they'd shaped. The old rifle went up on a wall, finally in the place where Claire taught. Not as junk, not as a museum piece to be laughed at, but as a symbol of the truth she'd spent her whole life learning and now spent her days passing on. New Marines would ask about it, and the story would get told, and it would grow into something like a legend of its own. The scratched old rifle that a ghost had carried out of exile. The rifle that saved a forgotten outpost. The rifle everyone laughed at until it fired once in the dark and taught a whole base full of men that they had been wrong about everything. But Claire always corrected them when the story leaned too hard on the rifle. It was never the rifle she'd tell them the way she'd told Jake, the way she'd told Cole, with what she'd thought were her last words. People want it to be the rifle because a rifle you can hold, a rifle you can understand. But the rifle never mattered. It was just steel and wood. What mattered was the choice behind it. The choice to stand between other people and the thing that would kill them. Anyone can pull a trigger. Not everyone will give their life so the person beside them gets to keep theirs. That's the only thing that ever made me dangerous. And it's the only thing I can't teach you, because you either decide the people next to you matter more than you do, or you don't. Everything else I can teach. That part is up to you. Years passed. Claire grew older at the work she'd chosen, and she watched hundreds of young people walk out of her hands and into the world carrying a piece of her and a piece of her team and a piece of everyone who'd ever stood in the open so someone else could live. She never went back to being a ghost. She'd earned her name back, and she kept it, and she wore it like the thing it finally was, not a code name, not a legend, not a headstone, but simply the name of a woman who had been broken and betrayed and buried, and who had stood back up anyway and turned all of it into a reason to protect the next person and the next and the next. The people who had underestimated her all those years ago, the ones who mocked her rifle, who questioned why command would send someone like her into a combat zone, who saw a fragile soldier hiding beneath a worn hood, had been wrong about everything. She was never the thing they thought she was. She was never fragile. She was never finished. And she was never, not for one single day, the person the world had written off as gone. She was the one who changed everything. Because the greatest weapon on any battlefield was never the rifle, and it never would be. It was the person willing to carry it into the fire for someone else. Claire Donovan had been that person on a forgotten ridge in Afghanistan, and she remained that person for the rest of her life. And through every soldier she ever taught, she would go on being that person long after she was gone. That was her victory. That was her home. And that was the truth no one would ever be able to bury again.